How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Care Talk. Guys, can people like Jake Haro ever change? Abuse, empathy, and the limits of rehabilitation. This question actually comes from one of our viewers who left this great comment that we are now going to make into a discussion, me and Russ Hamilton. So let me get Russ Hamilton on real quick. What up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself, please, to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Russ Hamilton. I am a retired and former sergeant from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started my career way back at San Quentin in 1989. Later on, I became a senior juvenile correctional officer after retiring from CDCR. I am currently working for a private company where we do re-entry and rehabilitation work for a local probation department and a local county jail where I'm a case manager. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos on Facebook, and that's dedicated to the brave men and women who work behind the walls, and that includes everybody, just not the badged people. I mean, including the badge people, obviously, but not just them. It's for everybody. And then beyond that, I'm also an author with a book out called "Killing Complacency: Tactical Awareness for Corrections Professionals." And I am also the founder of a new website that I'm going to have coming on very soon. I can't quite announce it yet, but it's going to involve people who can instruct our people how to do things in a better way, but it's going to have a lot of neat little perks and gizmos and stuff like that. But getting close.
And guys, be advised, I also have a few books on the market. I think you guys would also find these two books of interest: Inmate Manipulation and Coding. Yes, it's written about the prison world, but it does apply to the real world because it's manipulative behavior. And this as well, Breaking Boundaries. This is about how undue familiarity starts, but the same tactics that are employed here inside a prison setting also is employed in real life. Hey, real quick, before I read the comment from the viewer, I thought this was powerful. Someone sent me this picture. A child's first bully is an unhealed parent. So there's a softer side to that, obviously, because they're saying unhealed. But the first thing I see right now is a child's first bully could be a bad parent, an abusive parent. I thought that was interesting. So we're going to be talking about Jake Haro today. This comment came from the video that I did yesterday about how could Jake Haro pass parenting classes, because he was provided that when he was found guilty of his first child cruelty charge with his first child, who later became named Promise Faith. So let me go ahead and read this whole comment here. And then me and Russ here will go ahead and break this down. And we have a few questions that we're going to answer that relate directly to what we believe is in need to be answered from the comment. So the comment, here it is. So this was a really interesting segment. So it's talking about the show we did yesterday, or I did yesterday. It is really insightful to what they do in the USA. I think the programs are really good. Now, I have listened to this. It makes me ask more questions. Jake had injured Promise multiple times. So that's Jake. Now we're talking about his first child back in 2018, in which he was later found guilty of in 2023. But it looks like they gave him a very, 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 very lenient sentence. Okay, so Jake had injured Promise multiple times. This was not just the once off, whoops, I made a mistake, I feel bad, I will attend program and counseling. To me, hurting a baby with colic, wind, hunger pains, scared, soiled rash, and just needing to feel secure is unacceptable. These actions are so heartless, it makes me cry. How can a grown man do this to a little baby? Would parent classes, counseling sessions, and anger management classes change Jake? If not on drugs, if not mental health disability or mental disorders causing poor regulation, has a DSM-5 assessment ever been done on Jake? Even if that was the case, the real issue here to begin with is no empathy, selfishness, power abuse, and poor attachment issues. This then asks the other question about personality disorders with attachment issues. Hold on. Most parents want to protect their children, not to do harm. Jake has failed to recognize these babies, including a manual, to be human and not allowed annoying object to abuse. In all honesty, Jake should have been given life in prison, 20 years plus, for ruining the life of this little girl. she can't get her quality of life back. Even with years of counseling, training, classes, etc., is it enough to rehabilitate a man with no empathy? How can you teach someone like that empathy? I am tired. I need sleep. I need sleep. I need to sleep. This thing just keeps making noise in my head. I have to shake her up. Oh, sorry, I'm reading this wrong. So basically, she's talking about him as if he's thinking like, I'm tired. I need sleep. This thing keeps making noise. I have to shake her up to shut her up. This is not normal thinking. Therefore, a few months of classes would not be enough to change someone like this. As a repeated offender, given a 10-week-old, multiple injuries. If he was in jail, Emmanuel would never have had to be the second child to suffer. I hope all those in justice learn something from this, so a person like Jake won't get away with it again. So I thought this comment was just, I mean, it's got a lot of questions. It's more than to comment with some areas that we can discuss. So I wanted to break this down into a really good dialogue. And Russ is very familiar with rehabilitation. Russ crossed in from corrections into rehabilitation. So he's definitely the perfect person to talk about this. And it's going to be a really deep dialogue again. Can people like Jake Haro ever change? Abuse, empathy, and the limits to rehabilitation. So came up with a few things. So real quick, Jake Haro's first harmed his infant daughter, Promise Faith, injuring her multiple times. And then later he harmed and possibly murdered. We believe he did murder Emmanuel. This establishes a pattern of escalating violence, not a one-time lapse. Guys, if you're not familiar with this case, please check out the older videos. But basically, the cruelty he did to Promise Faith, I mean, it's horrible. I mean, right now, currently, she only uses 3% of her brain. She cannot speak, cannot walk, cannot see. I mean, he left her permanently damaged. So this isn't just about, again, but it's not just about Promise Faith, even though she's the only person right now that can tell Jake's story of him being an experienced child abuser, because we don't know where Emmanuel is. We assume he's dead, but we don't know where he is. So Jake and his wife, Rebecca, have been charged with murder. This isn't just about one child, it's about repeated harm. That escalation forces us to ask whether rehabilitation is possible or whether some people represent a permanent danger. So at the very beginning, Russ, before we get into the first question, so how I organize these shows, guys, is for about 2.5 hours. I usually go through my thoughts, answer questions, filter those questions through ChatGPT and Claude, and then kind of go back and forth. And then we develop the questions with the guest, and then I send the guests the questions, and they tell me if they're able to discuss it or not. It's a great little system, but it does take some time because we do try our best to answer the questions that we feel are being asked, but we make sure that we answer the questions that are well within our expertise. So the core concept first here is why some adults abuse children. So I came up with 3 off the top of my head. So abuse often isn't about discipline, because remember, guys, discipline is corrective action. So it's supposed to teach the person. Now we're also talking about a baby here. So discipline and right now as an infant, they're not going to understand discipline. You have to be a little bit more patient with them. They're not really ready to reason at that age. So again, abuse often isn't about discipline. It's about power over the most vulnerable. So one, you got power. So that's asserting strength over someone weaker. Then you got control, dictating behavior and enforcing obedience. And then you have dominance, combination of power plus control, enforcing superiority. Now, mind you, dominance to me is what the abuser is trying to hope to get long-term. Dominance is more long-term. Now, Jake Haro's connection. Infants like Promise, Faith, and Emmanuel can't resist or comply. Hurting them suggests a drive for domination and not discipline. And that's easy to figure out because of the age of the children. They're not there to reason. They can't comply. They can't resist. So that abuse is strictly about dominance, power, control. So Russ, the first question I got here is, what does Jake's repeated abuse of infants, children too young to disobey or resist, reveal about his true motivations? And was this really about discipline or a deeper drive for power and dominance?
Well, I think, certainly, you can touch on those elements and you can see them as deeper drives, maybe as more of an overall, what's going on in a psychological background. I think it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit less complex than that. I think it's a drive for self-soothing by stopping an irritation. Much like you would swat a mosquito that lands on your neck. This is essentially what he's done to these kids, and it's devoid of any type of human hierarchy of values with regards to that. So I think, like, if we're thinking about domination, I mean, I think that that's a much more complex psychological facet to things, and I think it's just really about him having to get rid of what to him is a minor irritation, and doing it at any cost, and to a point where he's pretty much engaged in blind rage.
And I actually have here self-soothing. I have that when we cover over section 3, because what I was doing here is trying to cover areas where people could abuse. So yes, we are talking, or why they abuse. So we are talking more about Jake Haro, but I was also trying to give a little bit more of a generalized context. But I do have, what I do agree is some level of self-soothing, or on a worse scale, enjoyment, because that's another thing. His reason for abusing really hasn't been discussed, because I don't think people know. I mean, have we sat down and asked this person, I mean, who is Jake really? I mean, is he an impulsive person that really can't control his anger, or for some reason does he enjoy what he's doing? And I think when we get to rehabilitation, which we'll explore later, I think one of the things that people look at to see if they can be rehabilitated is what immediately they do after the fact. Because again, if I have someone that acted impulsively and then quickly tries to help the child, not in an effort for their own survival, but rather this is the right thing, and they feel remorse and guilt over it, then that's something that I think efforts to rehabilitate can work on and help the individual with. But if the person really doesn't care, continues to do it, never seeks help for the child, then the question is, well, why are they doing it? And that why matters, because that why will determine if the person can be, I'm not even going to say the word save, because once you say the word save, that puts a lot of onus on the person, like the counselor. The counselor, if they think they have to save every inmate, then they wind up crossing into areas they shouldn't be crossing into. They take responsibility of the wrong that the inmate's done to the point where they own it, and not the inmate or not the person in need of change. So I don't like using the word save. I'd rather just say, can they make an effort to change their mindset? But again, it's all about effort. The person in control of that outcome is going to be the person on the other end of whatever the program is. Now, so again, I chose power because usually when people are abusive, there is some level of power over what they're looking to control, and the child would have to be seen as an object, because again, it's if I'm beating something to oblivion, I can't see the humanity. I just see it as an object. It is about control in the moment. So if they're having trouble with the baby and they just can't reason with the child, which who could reason with a baby? It's a baby. They will try to dominate, control, and usually what they lean towards is some type of physical control. That's shaking babies, or in this case here, probably hitting the baby with his fist, or maybe throwing the baby across the room. And they're not clear with how the baby's been abused, or how both babies have been abused. And then the dominance it's a combination of power and control, because I think it produces fear. So then eventually they believe that maybe by doing this, the child would be conditioned, and now the child becomes fearful of that individual. So they're hoping when the child starts to not have control, crying, whatever it is, that their presence has that level of dominance through the control and power they've established. So I just wanted to kind of put things in general, but I agree with Russ and what Russ is saying. I mean, you got the first offense with promised faith. Now you have the murder of Emmanuel. I mean, what do we know about this guy? Is he beating up the child because he's impulsive? But again, most likely if someone's impulsive, they should try to do the right thing and get the baby help, not fall into some survival mode where they're worried about covering their own ass, or maybe they enjoy it, or maybe it's self-soothing. So I will cover that. But Russ, I want to go now to impulsivity and emotional regulation. So some abusers lash out impulsively, but a pattern of repeated abuse is different from losing control once. So linked to poor emotional. So in this case here, impulsivity is linked to poor emotional regulation, stress, or untreated mental health. That could be a concern, or looks different from a systematic escalation of harm. Now, Jake Haro's connection, and this comes from directly from the viewer. Now, this is the person who left the comment. Was they question whether Jake was ever evaluated for mental health, but notes the deeper problem: lack of empathy and repeated targeting of infants. So, like, even if Jake wanted to mention that he has mental health concerns, maybe he was abused as a child, or maybe taking drugs, who knows? He's still repeatedly targeting infants. So after he did it the first time, get help for the child, but why did you not get help for yourself voluntarily? Why, at this point, are we forcing the help on you? Like in the first case with Promise Faith, out of desperation, they took her probably to the hospital. That's where they discerned that this child's being abused. But with that said, if he would have brought the child to get help the first time he acted impulsively, that would have showcased two things: remorse and guilt for what they've done. But then he would also be able to step up and say, I need help. But he didn't do that. So now how do we separate impulsive, uncontrolled outbursts from a consistent escalating pattern of abuse like Jake? What does his history suggest?
Well, yeah, clearly his history is just one of, indulging in the rage and either lacking the necessary physiology to deal with that, or possibly lacking good skill sets with regards to communication and alternatives and ways to deal with stress, and all of the things that we put within the mix when we're trying to work with individuals that we are rehabilitating. And so with him, it's sad, because I really think, like, I don't want to say the system failed him, because he is a failure in and of himself. But what I'll say is that the system failed those kids, and the system was reliant wholly upon his compliance and him being able to check mark all of the boxes, which he did, and then they really never contrasted that against the gravity of the crime that he committed, which was horrific. And so the system was broke at that point, at least with regards to his specific case. And so they were looking for compliance, not commitment. And so when you're looking for compliance rather than commitment, this is the result that you get. And this is one of the deep underlying problems that resides inside of modern rehabilitative attempts.
Yeah, and guys, as I said, I just got to keep on reminding people. I did it in my show yesterday. Sadly, the way successes are noted is if a client successfully completes something, but that doesn't mean they completed it for the right reasons. These systems can easily be manipulated, which is explored in the episode that I did yesterday. So with that said, sometimes success is preventing the person from being around children. That would be success. Like, I'll guarantee you, if Russ had a client that he didn't feel comfortable with, because Russ is very good at recognizing manipulation, trust me, he would know if someone's bullshitting the process. And I think Russ would find success personally if he said, hey, even though this person successfully completed the program and they may have BS their way through the risk assessment right afterwards, this person knows how to play the system. And I think that is successful. Successful isn't about just the completion. It's about whether that person should be around children again or not. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Well, yeah, I think that the true point, though, is really not that the rehabilitative side messed up, which they did, but the criminal prosecution side is the one that messed up, because he wouldn't have had to be in any type of rehabilitative programming if the criminal justice side had done its part. He would have been behind bars still to this day. So I mean, it's kind of like we can't say that the rehabilitation failed him when he should not have been in rehabilitation at all.
Yeah, I agree. And if I just may add to the question that I asked Russ was, how do we separate impulsive, uncontrolled outbursts from a consistent escalating pattern of abuse like Jake? What does the history suggest? I know, as I said, people look for ownership, even during the impulsive activity, because some people may act impulsively, driven by the pressures of the situation. So let's say he has a crying baby and he lashes out because he just can't handle the repetitiveness of the crying baby. But then in the moment when he lashes out, maybe he hits the baby once, realize, oh my God, I messed up, and then takes the baby to get help, and also volunteers himself for some level of help as well because of what he did. That to me shows, okay, maybe this individual is someone we could work with, because it happens that, it's sad what he did, but, maybe you can empathize a little bit more with him. But in this case here, it was repetitive. He hit more than once. He hid the baby from being seen for a while. That's where the escalated abuse came from. Same thing with Emmanuel. So there really is no remorse or guilt. And the funny thing is about what I really want people to understand is that integrity or true change doesn't come from getting caught and then deciding you did something wrong. It comes from catching it in the moment and making the efforts at that point to do what needs to be done. And I'm sure people like Russ who do the rehabilitation program should be looking at that. Did the person do this and then jump to do what was right? Or is the only reason why the person is doing something right now is because they've been caught, and now they're looking to maneuver through the system to do what benefits them, because now they're in self-survival mode. So now, Russ, you touched on this. I want to bring it back up again. I actually had it was learned behavior, self-soothing, and enjoyment. But here it says enjoyment and self-soothing. So the core concept. So violence can be learned. And guys, this is not to give excuses. This is just to provide a perspective. So when you're watching the videos, know that we're giving you every perspective possible. But we already made it clear of where we stand with Jake Haro. But let's just feed into this dialogue real quick. So violence can be learned from an abusive childhood, but when it continues, it may serve a deeper purpose, a way to self-soothe or even provide gratification. That's what Russ touched on right before we jumped into this. This transition reveals how violence may shift from a reaction to stress. Oh, wait, okay, so sorry. This transition reveals how violence may shift from reaction to stress to a coping mechanism and eventually to an act that brings disturbance to satisfaction. So you got the learned behavior, so copying what was modeled in childhood. We don't know enough about Jake to know if he was an abused child. And again, it's not in an effort to minimize what he's done. But again, even if we don't believe the person can be saved, there's still going to be efforts to rehabilitate him. So you do have to get to the foundational reason of why they make these choices. And sometimes you have to look at their past, but their past is not being evaluated to give them excuse, but rather a perspective to work from, because ultimately you're going to take that past and shift it into some level of ownership so they can't blame the past anymore. So you're kind of looking at what their initial obstacles will be, and then you're going to work around those obstacles to go ahead and then try to get him to take ownership without pointing to external circumstances or conditions. Because then if you make the change is conditional. It's not sincere. It's not rooted in anything foundational. That means that the person has learned something here at the root cause, and now we could start moving them forward. So then you go from learned behavior to self-soothing. So violence becomes a twisted coping tool to manage inner stress, rage, or anxiety, momentarily relieving tension, because that's what it is. It's impulsive. I got a baby crying. I can't handle it, or whatever it is. So I just do whatever I can to shut the baby up. It has nothing to do with doing what's best for the baby or to understand why the baby's crying. It's rather, I need to shut this baby up. So the mindset has nothing to do with the needs of the child, but rather your selfish needs to soothe. So then the enjoyment here, because this is where I added another layer. When abuse escalates, it may no longer be about control or stress release, but about deriving gratification from harm. And I believe that could, that's another level up. Do we know that enough about Jake to say he's doing it because he enjoys it? Or is he doing it because that's the way that he reacts to things? That's left to be discovered. But the pattern of now this is the second child could lead to either how he reacts to pressure, or it could be some level of enjoyment he gets out of this. So now the progression from promised faith to Emmanuel suggests something more disturbing than frustration. The violence may have begun as a learned behavior, morphed into a way to relieve his own inner distress, and then crossed into gratification, or gratification, which is an escalation that reflects both self-soothing and enjoyment in harming. So if someone was abused themselves, that may explain where violent patterns begin. I didn't say justify, I said explain. But when the violence escalates from one infant to another, does this cross into something more disturbing, like violence used to self-soothe, or even actual gratification in harming?
So yeah, I think that there is a component where it's a learned behavior, but obviously what's going on with him, it appears to me, is that it's beyond learned behavior, because you can learn something, but you're still within the realm of being able to deal with it, emotional and psychologically, which apparently he isn't. I think to kind of say that it goes beyond to to gratification, which would put him somewhere on the spectrum of being a sadist. There might be an element of that. I really think, though, it comes down to really base, gross emotions, where he just reacts and lashes out always, on that level. When you look at things like the anger scale, where like 0 is really chill, and then 10 is blind rage. Well, when you get up there, and about 2, 3, 4, people start shutting off the thinking side of their brain, and for him, the transition, he doesn't go through that whole transition. He just goes from 0 to 10, and there's not much in between. And so I think that's the base part of it. I think it's just emotional outrage. As for the learned part of it, yeah, there's a lot to be said. We call them in the business, adverse child experiences, which is ACE. And so, can that traumatize and really bring about bad or unhealthy behavior? Sure, it can. Ultimately, I think, though, it's an irritation to him, and an irritation must be dealt with immediately. And I think it's just all about blind rage. And I think that's why he's able to check all of the boxes and go, yeah, I know all of this stuff, because when he's sitting in class, he's chill, and he's at a 0, 1, or 2 on the anger scale. And so he's thinking, and so he can be compliant, but he has no commitment.
Yeah, and guys, the reward for him is the soothing he gets when the baby is quiet. He doesn't care how the baby got quiet, but now the noise has stopped. And I want to mention something. For the first child, Promised Faith, he did search how to feed a baby with broken ribs. That wasn't done to help the baby. That was done to protect himself from having to maybe bring the baby to the hospital to get checked, because having said that, he would have gotten the baby checked, because that does acknowledge that he knew the baby had broken ribs. So you're worried more about feeding the baby than getting the ribs checked, because at that point, there was no medical for that child after he did it. So I think for me, in regards to what Russ is saying, I still, again, look at what they did after that impulsive act. That to me is extremely important, because the effort to cover up afterwards, to me, also matters when the person gets caught and now they all of a sudden say they have to go through this change. Really? Why didn't you notice that in the heat of the moment? You notice it now? You notice it now because you're being forced to. That's the problem. There's no integrity in that. All right, so now I want to go to rationalization and excuses. So basically, I wanted to think of some ways that they would rationalize their behavior or provide excuses. I'm not going to say justifications. There's no justification for the abuse of a child. They are excuses. And by the way, when you're a counselor, you have to look at all these. which, and you have to make sure that this is not eliminating their chance to take ownership of what they've done. So rationalization are beliefs. And when a person starts to make an excuse into a belief, it makes it a lot harder for true change to happen, because rationalization does lead into serious beliefs and where they start to justify their behavior. So again, in our mind, we know it's an excuse, but in their mind, it becomes a justification. And if no one addresses them in between that, then they start finding this is the only way it can get done. And here's the worst part: I'm right in doing it this way. I feel right in doing this the way I'm doing it. So abusers often minimize or shift blame. So these rationalizations explain how they justify repeating harm. So I got some common excuses here: blaming their own abusive childhood, blaming the child for being difficult. So imagine that, blaming a 7-month-old or a 10-month-old or a 10-week-old. Sorry. So Promise Faith was extremely young, I think 10 weeks. And I believe Emmanuel, they say, was around 7 months. So now you're blaming the child that, as I said, can't resist, can't comply, can't reason yet. Then you have the external causes. So the drugs, alcohol, stress, mental health, of course. And then you have the false reasoning, expecting infants to understand. I added that as well, because I think there are also a lot of abusers that think that the baby actually understands what no means. Stop crying, stop crying, stop crying. Like the baby at 10 weeks is going to understand what the hell that means. No, that's the only way the baby knows how to communicate. So I think they heighten up the baby's level of reasoning to the point where they actually think they're talking to an adult. And now when the adult doesn't listen, they lash out, because there are people that will blame the baby. How can you blame a 10-week-old? How can you blame a 7-month-old? So I think they rationalize it by believing that the baby is able to reason a bit more. And that's insane. So Jake's actions weren't a single mistake. Let's get that clear. They were repeated, and that likely required rationalizations to silence his guilt. Even if he had that, we don't even think he has guilt or remorse, but he also would know that, I would like to think he knows he did something wrong, because he never brought the baby to get help. Even with Emmanuel, he never did the same. So it shows a pattern of abuse, which is definitely why he's designated as an experienced child abuser. But then they start to rationalize the fact that, why should I feel guilty? Why should I feel remorse? The child is the problem. So Russ, what kind of rationalizations might Jake have used to justify hurting Promise Faith and then Emmanuel? And what does this progression tell us about his mindset?
I mean, it goes the whole spectrum. He might say things out loud, or he might voice things in his head with regards to, I was abused as a child. Or he might take one step further back, where he might say, oh, this is the way that I was raised. He might say that, nobody should be expected to deal with this much crying. Might think in his own head, well, I had to do something, and that was all that I could come up with. Constantly saying is I had to deal with it somehow, or I thought this would make it stop. And, just a continual litany of getting away from, the actual magnitude of what he did. So, all of those things, are in there. I think that, if he was trying to rationalize on some of those levels and examples that I just gave, that at least, he has like some mild modicum of empathy, or at least he understands that he should have empathy. And so I think I think that, overall though, it just strikes me over and over again that, he's just full of a bunch of emotions, and he just rages. And rage is probably how he handles every single uncomfortable aspect of his life, including his wife, including, I don't know if he had a job or not, but things at his job, And that's would be my expectation. I bet he was a very difficult individual to get along with.
Yeah, and guys, remember, the excuses are the shifting of blame, where he later rationalizes, so he starts to find justification. So if you look at his actions, which become patterns, he starts to accept those as the way. So now, the more he continues to do it, it's harder for you to now create change in this individual because it becomes a belief in how they solve things. Now, imagine this: the longer he does it, if I'm a counselor, right? However, he justified what he was doing, I now have to go ahead and attack that justification and try my best to bring about guilt or remorse in this individual. And they may not want to feel it. So even if he had that hint of empathy that Russ mentioned, I have to get this person to admit guilt or remorse for things that are very horrendous. So he may build up a shield or okay, Russ.
Yeah, but that, that's only coming into play if you're assuming, that he's going down the route of behavioral health. What he was given, was just a course, and it wasn't attacking whether he's accepting blame, or whether he's taking ownership. It's a cookie cutter thing where a bunch of things are discussed and put out there, and some quizzes and some tests, but it's not going deep with some behavioral professional. I mean, it's possible that was part of it, but I doubt it, because that's not the way programming tends to actually work. Now, I can't say that 100% in this case, but that's usually what you're looking at. And so in terms of whether he had empathy or not empathy and stuff, for the most part, that's not even being addressed.
Well, yeah. So I mentioned in the episode I did yesterday that the completing of programs also follow with a risk assessment. The risk assessment is supposed to discern foundational causes of whether this person just kind of BS their way through the program, or did they actually, were they invested? And I think, to be honest with you, it really is just big about liability, right? He took a course, he completed it. Let's co-sign it. Let's give it to the judge, and the judge will lean on what was said from the risk assessment. So risk assessment would be the basically everything involved from the course, the one-on-one sessions, the group, the participation, the attendance, a lot of superficial stuff in the process. But the risk assessment should be done by people that are more qualified to get to the root of why this person is committing these behaviors. Is there remorse, or is this person sociopathic? That could be a concern that, basically would say, hey, this person completed this, but the risk assessment, yeah, sure, they may have passed the program with flying colors. Their homework was spot on. Sure, they seemed insightful, but they also know enough about what needs to be said that they're able to BS their way through some performative dialogue that they know the counsel wants to hear. Then the counselor could get caught up in their own bias. I need successes to make me look good. So therefore, I'm invested in this person. They may not want to see failure because they're invested. And then they wind up saying, well, he passed the program on all well, he was there every day, very superficial. But then the risk assessment is the other layer before it gets to whoever has to make the final decision as to whether he can see his children or not. So as I said, even if there was a hint of empathy, which I don't think there is in this guy's case, I really don't. What they would try to do is they would try to work on that. But if the person starts to rationalize their behaviors, then it becomes their belief system. Like, as you said, in their mind, we know it's excuses, it's shifting blame, but in their mind, it's a solid reason that removes them from being at fault. And I always tell people when you go to address that, the person has to admit that they've done something wrong that they've protected themselves from. They've compartmentalized it, because that's a serious thing to finally admit that you did wrong to. I hurt that child. I killed that child. There's no one else to blame but me. So having said that, if there's a hint of empathy, maybe you could build it out, but I don't think in this case, only because it never showed up in the aftermath of what they did. And that's actually the next part here, the aftermath, actions and feelings. So the concept here, Russ, is how someone reacts afterward reveals a lot about their capacity for change. I truly believe that. And I'm talking about in the moment, because I think somewhere along the line, a person that has remorse or guilt, they know what they've done is right or wrong. And in the moment, that's their moment to step up and address their concerns, because that would have killed two things at once, right? That would have helped the child out, but that also would have started working with him immediately. So again, cover up will be lying, minimizing, blaming others, shows lack of accountability, hiding the body, not bringing the child to the hospital when needed. And then the remorse or guilt is genuine recognition of harm, possible entry point for rehabilitation. That's key. And I think that would be more immediate and not later discovered after you have a child who is practically brain dead, that can't walk, can't move, and then another child murdered. So after harming promised faith, Jake's behavior suggested cover-up, not remorse. He later harmed Emmanuel, reinforcing this pattern. So Russ, after promised faith, Jake didn't seem to show genuine remorse, only cover-up. Now, how does the lack of accountability after the first child connect to his decision to harm Emmanuel later? And guys, we're building our dialogue off of the context that he was charged with murder right now, and then also his child cruelty charge against what he did to Promise Faith back in 2018, and he was charged in 2023. But again, Russ, after Promise Faith, Jake didn't seem to show genuine remorse, only cover up. And how does the lack of accountability after the first child connect to his decision to harm Emmanuel later?
So, I'll tell you that people in his position, they don't think in the same way that you and I think. For them, the amount of risk that they're willing to take is far greater than anything we would ever take. They are not, in essence, risk averse. And so for him, he got the little slap on the wrist. And did that factor into him, saying, well, you know what, this last time, I got 180 days. So maybe if I hide the body, I won't do any time at all. I think that calculation comes in after the fact, but definitely not before the fact, because at that moment in time, he's just willing to do anything probably to make that baby stop crying, or whatever it was that pissed him off in that moment. And so the calculation kind of really goes away and recedes as he traverses the entirety of the anger scale. And so at that point, there's nothing that's coming in that's going to stop him, dissuade him, give him a moment of pause, like, maybe I shouldn't throw this baby across the room, or whatever happened. So, I think it's just really hard to say with regard to that. I don't think that in the moment where the harm is being done, that he is in any way plugged in to anything that happened before. He certainly wasn't plugged into the classes he took. Was he plugged into to the fact that he did some time in jail, but he was getting out every day on work release? Apparently, he wasn't plugged into that. So I don't think that anything is necessarily impacting him at all. This is just was going to be a natural progression. And the only thing that was going to matter is at what point did the system actually stop him. So, 2 strikes and you're out instead of 3, apparently, in this case.
Yeah, that's powerful, Russ. And then also want to mention, remember, even after he did each incident, he was more worried about how the consequences affected him, and not how the consequences of what he did affected his children or his wife, if that's the case. So I think right there is a very selfish mindset, because now he's in survival mode. He becomes more about avoiding getting in trouble, as opposed to let's get help here. And obviously I need help. So that really,
he was going to continue thinking he was going to provide some kind of care for an infant with broken ribs, rather than get her appropriate medical care. I mean, what does that tell you? Hey, I'm gonna nurse her through, and I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, to me, that should have been what the damning evidence was. The fact that he Googled that, which goes to show you he had no care for taking that child to get to work, but rather I get help, but he rather feed the child with broken ribs. That also shows you that he knows what he did to the child. There's a bunch of things there that I think should have been explored during the first case, but hopefully, because they are able to bring his past case up, that 1109 law they have out in Cali. I hope they're able to use that now and re-look at that situation and bring up that. I think that's extremely important because that's someone that knows what they did was wrong, and now they're trying to get around it which could be further making the kids suffer. To me, that crosses into torture at some level. All right, so now I have change versus control. I think this is important too. So these last couple of questions really should just be more of a follow-up, so we can kind of speed through these. So I wanted to talk about the empathy question here. So the heart of the debate, can empathy be taught, Russ, or is it an absence, or is its absence a permanent danger sign? So one of the questions that the viewer asked was, how can you teach someone empathy? Can counseling or classes really instill empathy, or is this something that, if missing, marks someone as permanently dangerous?
So the spectrum on that is so broad. I would say there are people who truly can change and do change and make changes, and fortunately, I see that quite a bit, actually, even with some individuals that I believed were never going to change. Who had exceptionally high risk profiles with regard to that. The question has to be, though, is how much risk should society be willing to take? And it appears in this case here that the people that were handling the case just said, yes, society should accept anything and everything that this guy wants to do because he's exceptionally good at checking boxes. And so I think, when we look at it that way there just has to be some things beyond which you're not willing to take any more risk. And so in this case, the ball was dropped, and the ability to, keep this from happening a second time was lost. And it did happen a second time. And I would say that based on him and based on the fact of what he did to that first kid, that this was inevitable, right? And no one spoke to the inevitability of this that I can see anywhere. This was just handled at a level where they could just push it on through.
I want to add something to this. So empathy definitely cannot be taught. That's human connection. If the person doesn't have human connection, that's not something that can ever be taught. And the funny thing is, and me and Russ discussed this in our shows before, sometimes, maybe even counselors, we could project our own way of seeing things onto them and automatically put hope into something that really has no hope, which some individuals, just don't have empathy. They lack empathy. So again, I could project my own feeling towards something and think that now I can project that onto Haro. And of course, he's going to see things the way I see it. And he will, but he won't feel it the way you feel it. Let's make sure there's a difference there. He may see things the way you want him to see it. And that's very performative and how they'll work through the counseling sessions and all that other stuff, but it won't resonate. It won't feel. And experienced individuals can feel that. They listen to that gut instinct of their own and says, hey, you know what? There's something not connecting with this individual. That's why I think it's very important for the counselors to understand within details of exactly what they did, what happened before, what happened after, the pattern. I mean, do we have someone that really was pressured by the situation and, acted impulsively? Do we have someone that has some type of learned behaviors that we think we could shift their mindset because maybe there are hints of remorse in what they've done and what they did afterwards? But most of the time, I think that crime will tell you a lot of who they are and what they've done. And then that crime then can help the person doing the counseling try to get an understanding of, is this person able to change? Or like Russ said, are we just going through the boxes here? And I think that's extremely important because in the end, what that counselor does, they set things in motion. that I think really does start to build an understanding of who you are truly dealing with. And again, we said this before, but low risk, because most likely that is the answer that usually comes up at the end of the risk assessment. There's never going to be something that says no risk. And as I was doing the discussion yesterday, that was part of the discussion that evolved in my head. And the reason why they say low risk, hey Russ, man, you gotta pick and choose where you're at, because I'm losing it. I'm trying to.
I had to kiss someone, man, and I didn't want that.
Right. So low risk is also a liability thing, because people know I can't control the outcome. That outcome can only be controlled by that individual. So having said that, I can't present no risk because I'm not protecting myself or my side of interest. So they push up low risk. So most of the time when people are making decisions, they're making decisions that are usually, going to be related to, never an absolute, but somewhere of the extreme of low risk to high risk. But low risk, you still have pressures of the situation that can easily bring someone from low risk to high risk. So, there's so much that gets involved in that decision. That's why there should always be some level of oversight, some level of registration, because at any moment, it's not so much about trusting the individual, because you don't know how they're going to react to every situation. And because I can't control every situation, I can't guarantee you if that person is never going to do it again, because they could fall back into what's most comfortable. All I can know is we went through this. We got to some of the roots of the concern, so they're low risk. But when they say low risk, I think it's really low risk within them. They're not as risky as they once were. But unfortunately, I think it's just something that is got to be relooked at. I really do, because I think we got to do more laws right now to protect the children from being in households of repeated offenders of this manner. That's why there's something right now. I posted it on my post board on YouTube, the Emmanuel law, and they're looking for people to sign it. And it really does relate to some type of registration for child cruelty. All right, Russ, so we're getting down to the last few parts. We have justice versus rehabilitation. So we must balance two goals: helping people change versus protecting potential victims. So how do we balance the possibility of rehabilitation with the reality that some individuals like Jake may be incapable of change? And we kind of touched on that, but any added thoughts here?
I think we have to be careful with just throwing rehabilitation at each and every individual, because the truth of what you have going on out there within any given correctional facility or system is that there are a lot of people who are not suitable for rehabilitation. There are a lot of people that are not going to willingly participate. There's a lot of people that should never get out, no matter what. So when I look at some of those things, and there are some people that will be ready eventually, but just throwing a dosage of treatment out there, onto the tier and saying, hey, you know what, this gangbanger here, he completed 15 different classes, and so he's rehabilitated. It's just not so. People are, still, committed to the gang. They're committed to the process. They're committed to being about something in that environment, or being about something in that environment out on the streets. And so this idea that we should go out and provide rehabilitation for everyone is just really flawed, because there are people that, like I said, that are not going to accept it. There are people out there that are, certainly, should not be rehabilitated at all, because it just wastes a lot of potential for doing some good work with people that, that do check the right boxes. I know a lot of people are going to think that this is antithetical towards the way it should be, but one of the things that we look to do is, for a person that's low risk, we don't mess with them much at all, because low risk means they probably don't have a significant history. Low risk means that they probably have a job. Low risk means that they don't necessarily, have a lot of friends who are engaged in the lifestyle too. And so when we look at that, we don't want to do too much with them, because giving them a big dosage can actually harm them. It can regress them. It can introduce them to people that they shouldn't be introduced to. And so that's one facet of it. Some of the more high risk things, though, you can only go so far with that. Significant histories like this guy had are real indicators. Like, why are we pushing a bunch of dosage in his direction when he actually should be staying in jail for a significantly longer time? I just think that the system is really broken, but the system also, in some cases, does do a good job and does, provide a way for people to come back. I think that a lot of that, though, is not about, people who do significant harm. It's people that have done more significant harm to themselves with addiction and things like that. I think it's very nuanced. I think it's very difficult. And I have a lot of views on it, but I'll save those for a different day.
Yeah, but you made a lot of sense on that, because I think low risk, obviously, there are other things that note that they're low risk that goes outside of the individual. Like, do they have enablers out there or whatnot? And I get that. But I also want to add something to that that's extremely important. You got someone like Jake who committed to this horrendous crime. We're going to more focus on Promise Faith. That should automatically have made him a high risk, because you know what he's capable of doing at any time. Where if there was remorse and it wasn't that far, it wasn't repetitive. And that's the biggest thing, guys, is that it's repetitive. It's a pattern. He's an experienced child abuser. He definitely presents high risk automatically, because we know what he's able to do. We know his accepted patterns. So there's really the program is great. Let's do all that. But at the end of the day, he's still going to be a high risk, because no matter what the program does, and no matter how he BS's his way through the risk assessment, he can't minimize what he's already done. So that has to be taken into account. And that, in my mind, is what makes him a high risk. Also, again, not having any remorse, not having no guilt, not doing anything about it after the fact, trying to feed the kid, even though you know the kid was hurt. That presents the person high risk, because on top of the fact that it was a repetitive pattern, he tries to cover it up, or he tries to prolong what I think would be torture. That baby had to be in pain. And you did nothing. There's no empathy there, because the moment you see a child in pain, you don't react to that as a parent. You don't react to the child's pain. Of course you do. You're crying along with the child until it gets fixed. So I think the person, the high risk should not also be just determined by what comes across through the courses, the one-on-one sessions, the insight, the fact that, they know they've done something wrong. Okay, but does that mean they're going to change? No, I think the high risk should be connected to their capability of carrying it out again, and how far they're willing to go. This person did not do anything right even after the fact. So at that point there, in my mind, what they're capable of truly makes them high risk. Now, for the next question, we have system and responsibility. This is extremely important, because this is kind of what the discussion is right now. This is kind of what everybody seems to want to know more about. So, Russ, when the system fails to act decisively, more victims suffered. So Jake harmed Promise Faith multiple times, yet Emmanuel later suffered because Jake was not removed from access to children. So the person's comment says, if Jake had been properly incarcerated after Promise Faith, Emmanuel will never have been the second child to suffer. You notice they said this right, because it's not like if Jake was locked up, Emmanuel would never be born. We get that. But the question here is a second child. So I like how this person worded it. Took that into account. And then the question, Russ, is what does this tell us about the cost of second chances in cases of child abuse?
Oh, I think if you'll, notice on what I said just a little while back, I chose the word inevitability for a reason. This guy was on a path to do something bad, and it just so happened that his path intersected with a child that he fathered, and it's really as simple as that. So the fact of the matter is that the system allowed him to remain on that path so that he could father a child, so that what could happen would happen. Now that was going to happen. That was going to happen regardless at some point. But we
Hey,
could have.
Russ, that's extremely powerful what you said. I don't want you to just skim over that. You said the system allowed him to father a child. That is really good on the level of ownership you're pushing back towards the system. You said allow. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because I thought that was powerful.
Well, yeah, when he got caught up into the system, when they finally decided after 3 years, I believe it was, to go ahead and prosecute him, they had allowed him to remain on that path. I mean, they only took him, off of the streets for 180 days, if I recall correctly. I think that she was taken out of the mix for 120, and then they were put right back onto the path so that they could swerve right back into this same set of crimes. And so the system should have, put him up for a cooling off period of at least 20 years, and I think significantly more. But instead, they just looked at the crime of child abuse as child abuse, and they didn't really ever seem like they were upset about the degree of it. The kid, the Promise is blind. Promise has severe neurological issues. Is never going to be is never going to be a child in the sense of having a childhood. So he's taken all of that, and then you give him 180 days in which he's still allowed to, go out during the day and work, check back in at night, take his programming, and there's nothing else that's done there. They gave him the sentence, and the sentence said, "Hey, 180 days, you get to get out and work, and if you check all these boxes, you're good to go," and that's it. And so the inevitability could have been staved off, perhaps for decades, but perhaps forever. But we'll never know now.
And you want to hear something funny? I remember a case a while ago where there was a female that stabbed her husband. She said in self-defense, but she got him in the liver. It looks like the intent was to kill the individual, but I think they downgraded her charge later on after she went through her appeals, because she basically went after the ambulance for not coming on time, that her intent wasn't to kill the individual. Her intent was to protect herself, and then she wind up suing the ambulance because there was a delay. So I'm thinking, like, here, if Promise Faith would have died, we're looking at a whole different ball game. But with that said, I think some people will even try to go ahead and push what they've done onto the medical, who basically, could have saved, let's say, could have maybe protected Promise Faith from having those permanent injuries. So I wonder if at any point were there any lawsuits on the medical team who was working on Promise Faith that try to minimize accountability of what Jake did, because Jake did permanently harm her. And I think that really is attempted murder. And I'm wondering if at any point was that ever downplayed, where they tried to say, well, you know what, Jake didn't do all this. Had they been treated correctly at the hospital could have done more. And that's why you always got to be wary of the lawsuits that you put out later on that could help the aggressor. Because now if someone was to, let's say, sue the hospital because, they could have done more for Promise Faith, and I'm not saying this is the case, just a hypothetical scenario, that case then becomes a lawsuit that the accuser could then utilize. Just an FYI, I just thought of it when Russ was talking. But again, for here, what does Jake escalation from one infant victim to another reveal about his capacity for recognizing children's humanity or lack thereof? My answer is simple, just like Russ, he doesn't have it. So we could skip right over. Oh, sorry. That was, we're talking about system response. I read you the question for the next one. So let me speed through the next one. Patterns matter, escalation from one child victim to another, signal systematic targeting. What does Jake escalation from one infant victim to another reveal about his capacity for recognizing children's humanity or his lack thereof? Again, Russ, we could just speed right through it, right? He has none, correct? Would you agree with that? Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't view it as systematic. It's just you could say it's just opportunistic, but maybe not even maybe not even opportunistic. It's just situational because you put fire in the proximity to oxygen, and what is it that you expect?
Yeah. And then the last one, Russ, I have long-term protection. So at some point, rehabilitation is no longer realistic. The priority becomes protecting society from ongoing harm. So, Russ, at what point do we stop focusing on rehabilitation and shift fully to permanent protection of society through incarceration or long-term control measures for abusers like Jake Haro?
Yeah, once again, it just goes to the thing that I think is the real problem is that treatment and dosage and programming and all of those things have just become automatic, and so it's not like it even matters. I mean, if you look at what California does on paper, it looks marvelous, and the truth couldn't be farther from the truth itself, as it were. Too much. There's too much action and not enough. See, that's not the way I want to put it. The way I want to put it is there's a lot of thunder and very little flash with regard to it. Just trying to believe that you can treat everybody, and the system just shouldn't be designed to do that. The system should be designed to use resources in a wise manner so you get the most bang for your buck. Instead, we just say everybody's treated now, everybody gets rehabilitation for you, and rehabilitation for you, and rehabilitation for you. And what really happens, we just spread it so thin, and the dosage is so watered down, and the efficacy is so low that we're not rehabilitating everyone. But I'll get off my high horse now.
Yeah, and guys, I know as I evolved the dialogue yesterday, I know you can never say no risk because again, you can't control the outcome. That's up to the individual. But I think there should be success and recognized patterns that tell you that this person cannot go out. I think that's just as successful as making the determination that maybe they could, as long as there's always balance involved. Do we have proper supervision in play? Because even though the person's no risk, should not lessen the amount of supervision, because at any point they could be pressured to falling back into what they've done. So it really is looking at what they've done, what they did afterwards, and also more importantly, what they're capable of doing. Someone like Jake, it doesn't matter how successful they were in pro. It doesn't matter how successful they risked. Look what he did to the one child. The capability to go that far should automatically be the highest risk that you could put out there, which would automatically, in my mind, should have put that person behind bars, because there'll be a certain level of risk that the person should not be out in society. And that's the funny thing too. Maybe the low risk is what made them justify that he could be back out into society, because if they really put him at the high risk and they knew that this person was a monster, then maybe the next decision would be, hey, if this guy's that much of a monster, why the hell did we give him 1 day in jail and then the rest for a work program? Maybe the person is such a high risk that they should be behind bars, and just maybe that becomes the deterrence, is the consequence of the actions, not the want to change, but rather these are the consequences of what you've done. And this is now going to be your life for, 20 or more years. So basically for this show, guys, we covered the empathy question. Can empathy be taught, or is it absent permanent? The lifelong cost of promised faith in a manual. That's a victim impact. Justice for rehabilitation. When do we stop trying to rehabilitate and focus on protection? And then the pattern factor. Escalation from one victim to another as a clear red flag. Jake Haro case highlights the dangers of unchecked escalation, lack of empathy, cover-ups instead of remorse, and systematic failures. His pattern places him firmly in the category of ongoing risk, need for control. That's what I wanted to put as the next level above high risk. Ongoing risk, need for control. I thought that was the next level up. All right, Russ, what's your final thoughts, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think that now this particular case is going to have to move into the search for justice. I think that now it has to be about total accountability for what he's done in the past. He's going to have See, I don't even know if he's going to considering the way California is so messed up. I don't even know if his prior is going to be countered as a strike or not, and I doubt that it is. So I think that now it can't be about rehabilitation. It has to be about judicial vengeance, if you will, and I think that's what we're left with.
Yeah, and guys, please do me a favor. If you like the content, push it out, share. I can't trust YouTube into serving me out. They don't even monetize me. So it really goes on the audience, the family that we have here to push it out, engage, comment, keep on moving the videos up in the algorithm. Because if not, the videos don't get served, and as we're putting them out there, they just kind of die. And these are good dialogues here that we put a lot of effort in. And the reward does come by having more people watch it. That's the key. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe. All right, Russ, I'm going to put